David, welcome back to the People Quotient Podcast. We're getting close to the end of our series. For those who are listening, who've been following us, and those who haven't and are dialing in for the first time, in the previous several conversations we've had in this leadership series, we've talked about high-performing teams. We've talked about peak-performing individuals. We've also talked about leadership. And what does it mean? What does it mean to be a leader? How leaders differentiate themselves as an individual? I think in this episode, the focus is how do we bring it all together? David, as we come full circle, one of the things that I promised our listeners talk about is this notion of legacy. And I think you touched on it briefly. A lot of leaders, wherever they are in their journey, at least they talk about legacy. It's almost like having a legacy is a symbol of achievement. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not sure. But when you think about legacy and you think about all the leaders you've worked with, all the athletes and the politicians in all walks of life, do high-performing leaders talk about or think about legacy, or does that just happen? And then they look back and say, "Oh, that's my legacy. I wasn't trying to have one. I just have one." What can we learn from those who've got a legacy as to how they got there? And is that something we should worry about as emerging leaders or leaders in our current organizations?
So it is one of those things that I think that a lot of people think about, that a lot of leaders think about. And my personal encouragement, this is just my own view on my own 25, 30 years in the field. Don't think about it.
Yeah.
Think about sense of purpose instead.
Yeah.
And if you are defining and pursuing and renewing your own sense of purpose, and if you are thinking about what it is to be an inspirational and an aspirational leader, such as we've talked about in our earlier conversation, Rohit, then along the way, as a byproduct, as a glorious byproduct, you will be creating a legacy. But do it through the objective of living a sense of purpose rather than through the objective of how do I build a legacy?
Yeah. What does that even mean, legacy? And maybe that's where I should have started, because I think what you're describing is some people build because they're driving towards a sense of purpose. I think the legacy is sort of building behind them until they achieve, and it stays behind them. But when someone's like, what does legacy even mean? What does that mean? How do you describe legacy, even if it is a byproduct of achieving your purpose?
Yeah. But I think legacy is something that you leave behind that outlives you, that is bigger than you, right? That is more than you. And legacy could be a what, right? It could be the establishment of something that lives on beyond you. Yeah. But it also could be a sense of being, a sense of feeling, a culture, right? I leave behind a legacy that has transformed. The legacy that I leave is the transformation of the culture of this place, of this team, of this country. We think differently than we did before. We behave in a way that we didn't behave before. So legacy can show up in a number of different ways. Yeah. It's not always a fixed thing.
Yeah. As you're describing, I'm also thinking about, as I'm reflecting on it, also there's positive legacy and negative legacy.
Yeah.
So I think to your point, it doesn't have, it's a, whatever you leave behind, obviously the great leaders are thinking about positive things, but, some, despite best efforts, don't leave positive things. Some, because they don't think about legacy, actually leave behind a lot of bad things culturally, economically, in terms of the way of thinking and the people or the product. And so I think maybe I go back to, I renege my own first question, should people think about it? And now I'm thinking that people should absolutely think about it, but in a way that doesn't harm the business. So it's not in absence of purpose. So yes, think about your purpose, but also I wonder if it's also counsel to say, look, whatever you do now in an organization that will outlast you, because I always believe that organizations should outlast the people. Especially the leaders. You gotta think about the next generation of people coming behind you and what implications that would have. Is that something that detracts from your point about just live with purpose, or is that still in alignment with live with purpose and legacy would follow?
I still, again, my personal view is go with purpose as your North Star rather than legacy. Yeah. Part of the reason I say that, Rohit, is because there are many examples out there of people who pursue legacy, and that can lead to some pretty bad, some pretty limiting, some pretty destructive behaviors in their own pursuit of that legacy. I've seen people trodden over in order for someone else to achieve their legacy. To me, sense of purpose is yes, it's about a destination, but it's also about the journey to that destination. How do I want to get there? And, so I would encourage people to think much more around sense of purpose, safe in the knowledge that legacy gets created on the back of that versus legacy being the primary objective. And, that will be achieved whatever way it will be achieved.
Yeah, one last
thing
I'd say to that. Even if we mix the words. Yeah.
We've talked about people and organizations that do this. An example of legacy, an example of sense of purpose is the creation of other leaders, the creation of leaders who are better than me. That's a phenomenal sense of purpose. It would be a phenomenal legacy to leave behind. It may not be noticeable. It may not necessarily be attributed to you. And my message to leaders out there is, who cares? If you're bothered about sense of purpose, you will walk away from that part of your career, or maybe at the end of your career, safe in the knowledge that that's exactly what you achieved. And if nobody else outside of that acknowledges you for that, who cares?
Yeah.
But if you're bothered about legacy for me is about other people recognizing and acknowledging you for what you did, right? That would be nice. It would be nice if that happened to us, but it shouldn't be necessary. Yeah. If you're hanging your entire future on whether other people recognize even, let alone acknowledge you for the legacy that you have created, you are transferring power into other people's hands. And that's always a dangerous thing to do for an individual. Whereas if you're following a sense of purpose, and the people important to you on that journey know how you've been living it and how you've been achieving it. That's enough.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think giving other people the power is something that unintentionally happens because right from very early on, we're graded from school to sports to co-curricular activities by other people. And so we're wired to be graded and then judged based on that grade and then appreciated or told off and ranked or, high or low based on that grade. So as humans, I think this notion of being graded is sort of embedded pretty much from the minute you gain real consciousness of who you are and what you do. And I think what you're saying is it's almost like great leaders eventually stop worrying about their grades and what they really are motivated by and driven by is their sense of purpose. So the first thing I was just listening to you, so breaking down into bite-sized pieces for some of us mere mortals is like, start to get away from worrying about the grade, but moving toward the purpose. And the more you move towards the purpose, the less you'd worry about the grade.
Yes.
And then so that sort of separation starts to happen. And I think tying that back to your point about legacy is, as long as you're living in that world of purposeful being, and I think you touched about, human being, from doing, from being lost in the last conversation. I think similarly, this would allow you to create that separation, which is where ultimately a legacy would be formed. And then the final bit I would just sort of pick on what you said was, I love the fact that, you were highlighting that legacy, as you've described it, without having to do any work, manifests in so many ways that you don't know. The people that you work with, maybe they've picked up the way you think or the way a certain calculation is done or the way you ask a question or way you conduct a meeting. So it doesn't have to be this grand taking people to Mars mission. It could be something very, very simple, but you're just living your authentic self. And in that process, people organically around you will pick it up. And that's, to your point, that is legacy that you will never know about. maybe 10 years from now, somebody might call you and say, hey, by the way, I picked up that one thing that you did 10 years ago. And that would be a good day, but most of the time you won't know. And so getting caught up in this notion of receiving validation on something you do is probably not the best way forward. I love this, David. I know we've covered a lot. We've been on a journey in this series, and I'm sad to say that it's finally come to this end where, man, I have pages full of notes, and we've talked about so many things. And for those who have been with us, I thank them, and I think personally, I'm going to listen to a lot of it, but every time I do, I'll probably absorb something new from this conversation. So as we conclude this, what would be your parting words of wisdom for those who are listening to this, who have stayed with us through this entire series? What would you leave them with as your final counsel on all these topics that we've covered?
Oh, my goodness. We started with an easy question. I can see we're ending with an easy one. Oh, my goodness. I would say in order to be at your best for others, you have to, first of all, be at your best for yourself. So my plea to folks out there is don't see investing in yourself as being selfish. It's actually selfless, because unless you do it, you're never going to be the best leader of others that you have the potential to be.
Yep.
So go away from here and think about what are the top 2 investments I can make in myself, in my own evolution, in my own development, in my own future. And through the strength that will come as a result of that process, then start to think, how can I invest in others? How can I build those around me? And if the investments you make in yourself are around really thinking about who am I and who do I want to be? How am I experienced today and how do I want to be experienced tomorrow? What kind of leader am I? What kind of leader do I want to be? How do I build trust with others? What does that look like in practice? If those are your 2 investments in yourself, you'll be on to a fine start.
David, that's awesome. I thank you so much for spending all this time sharing your 3 decades of experience with some unbelievable global people. And I think if they are listening, I'm sure they're reflecting on their journey with you and lots and lots of conversations you've had with them. So thank you for bringing all of that wisdom to this series, to People Quotient Podcast, for taking the time, and I really enjoyed it. It's given me a lot of good energy to go and do a lot more of what I'm supposed to be doing. And so thank you again for taking the time. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Really grateful.
Absolute pleasure, and I thoroughly enjoyed it too, as I do with all our conversations. Right. So good luck going forward.
Thanks, David. Talk soon. Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Subscribe to the People Quotient channel, where leadership meets action. Powerful conversations with practical insights that you can use right now. See you in the next episode.